My distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker today. And let me just acknowledge that this speaker's visit is co-sponsored with the Institute for African Development here at Cornell University, where he's going to be giving a talk tomorrow as well. So our speaker today is Dr. Leo Charles Zulu. He's an associate professor in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences at Michigan State University. He also serves as the interim director for the African Studies Center, the equivalent of Institute for African Development, also at Michigan State University. His research interests include political ecology, environment and development, community-based natural resources management, all this in rural Africa, deforestation, food security, and adaptation of rural communities in Southern Africa to climate change. He'll be speaking to us today on a very interesting topic, empowering household energy transition amid the climate change in Sub-Saharan Africa, a case study of cleaner Pellet-Fed gasifier stoves in urban Malawi. With that, let's welcome our speaker and in the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. So it's a pleasure coming here. And my first time at Cornell, so greeted with really wonderful weather yesterday, and I've had a chance to walk around your beautiful campus, so I'm totally sold already. So, so I'm gonna talk about. There's a big debate about energy transitions, and you see in the Sustainable Development Goal, the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, that talks about access, affordable and equal access to clean energy for all by 2030. But a lot of African countries are kind of left behind. So I kind of lay the problem here. So clean cooking energy is often neglected when countries and organizations are talking about energy. And some people have spoken about energy as the forgotten energy crisis. And recently, at the Conference of the Parties, the 27th one, cooking energy was recognized as one of the breakthroughs. These are breakthroughs. These are areas that you really need significant progress in order to cross over the threshold and start making difference. In like various further industries that are important in climate change, and so they've added now clean cooking energy. And so now the target is to try and get 2.4 billion people having access to clean cooking by 2030. And then that will require about $10 billion investment every year to do that. 923 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa lack access to clean cooking, 2.4 billion around the world. And heavy dependence on biomass fuels, especially firewood, is causing problems, environmental problems, deforestation, soil erosion, and related problems. And then biomass cooking also contributes to climate change. Some numbers take it up to 5% just from burning fuels, to 5% of global warming as coming from burning these fuels. And looking at, it also undermines nutrition. Now, if fuel is in short supply, and in a lot of African countries, beans are an important source of protein, for instance, if it takes you 3 hours to cook beans and you need a lot of energy, people are unlikely to cook beans. And then over time, there's impacts on nutrition as well. And also household air pollution from the burning, unclean burning, it causes up to between 500 and 600,000 deaths from diseases, respiratory-related diseases per year. And if you compare it to other diseases in Africa, it's malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis. This number is larger than that number of deaths by 15 to 32% every year. So that's how important it is. And then when you look at a lot of cities in Africa, the urban cooking fuel sector is underdeveloped. So there's really a need to move things forward in the urban sector. So that's what this project is focused on, looking at urban fuel development in Africa, focusing on the case of Malawi, but then in the context of climate change. What are those core benefits that you get from climate change? And what are the implications for? So just diving in already into Malawi and looking at the state of cooking energy there. So about 20.4 million people in Malawi, tiny little country in Southeast Africa, densely populated. Poverty is a big problem. Only about $645 per year in per capita GDP. Very much dependent. More than 80% of the energy needs come from biomass. And you also have only 11% of the households are connected to electricity supply. So people talk about transition of energy to electricity. Well, you have to connect people to electricity supply first, and then people have to have cookstoves and all that. So we have to be realistic about what's possible by 2030 in terms of transition to energy. So taking the case of Malawi, 98% of all the cooking in households depend on biomass, charcoal and firewood to cook. So this is where we are coming from as a context. Only 1.2% will use electricity for cooking. More people use it for lighting and other things, but cooking is a different thing. That's why cooking is an area that needs focus and is often neglected. I'll just flip back there. So, but one of the things that has happened there is to try to introduce efficient cookstoves. And they have gone about 40 years. We have the Kenyan Jiko stove, the ceramic stove that uses charcoal. In urban area, charcoal is the main cooking fuel. And the efficiency of these cookstoves has been stagnant for 4 decades. The Jiko stove gets the most efficiency you can get to that is maybe 20 to 30% conversion efficiency, converting wood to charcoal. And so if we are really going to make any progress, you need transformative change in the efficiency of the cookstoves as well. So this is like low-hanging fruit. You increase the efficiency of the stoves, then you can reduce a lot of the amount of wood you extract, and then some of the environmental problems are addressed as well. So some of the things that are happening that can help this, a lot of the charcoal is obtained illegally from protected areas and all. The people obtain the wood and they make charcoal, and governments are weak to enforce the regulations. And so you find that, but what's happening now is that the price of illegal charcoal is increasing. In the case of Malawi, it doubled. Part of it was because they had increased the enforcement a little bit. There are policies, the national energy policy for Malawi really ignores the biomass part of things. It's like an afterthought. They talk about electricity and other things. But then I was part of developing this Malawi national charcoal strategy. So I worked with the government of Malawi to produce a national charcoal strategy 2017 to 2027, having a holistic look at cooking energy in Malawi and over that period of time. So efficient cooking stoves, technologies, looking at alternatives and sustainable supply production of charcoal and all those kinds of things. And then there's also a compact that Malawi implements. It's called the Cleaner Cooking Compact, targeting 5 million improved cookstoves in rural areas, and then targeting about 1 million in urban areas by 2030. So these are some of the strategies that are being implemented. But what I'm going to talk about now is the introduction of these ultra-efficient cookstoves that are called gasifiers. And I talk about a particular model of gasifier. This is an example of the stove and how it burns. So if some of you know some Nyanja, you might understand. But that's how the stove burns. It's a stove that uses. It's a 2-stage stove. It actually, it's an old technology when you go back. It used to be called wood gas here. It's essentially a technology that converts biomass in an intermediate process that requires little oxygen, pyrolysis, and it kind of converts it into middle gases here. And then you introduce oxygen, and then you burn that gas. So it's like cooking with gas from wood or from biomass is how some people have characterized it. So it's ultra efficient, and it's also has lots of core benefits as we're gonna look. Lots of reductions in carbon emissions. For this particular stove, it's called the Mimi Moto. 95% reduction in carbon emissions. So all those health challenges that I talked about, very high efficiency. So it increases the efficiency to about 50% of the conversion efficiency of the wood. So I'm nearly doubling the efficiency. And what's happening is that some of the things that are happening is that contributing to this goal, sustainable development goal, is that this technology is really an opportunity, but it's hardly ever used up. So we started looking at urban areas, but a lot of the potential will have to go to rural areas where the majority of people live. So we just wanted to understand what's happening with this stuff. So when I'm talking about the energy transition in this way, you're going from the traditional 3-stone stoves. In a lot of rural areas, they still use that. And then this is like when they're using charcoal, that's like a traditional metal stove. People just makeshift tinsmiths do that. So you're using charcoal. This is a Kenyan Jiko ceramic stove. Can an improved charcoal stove? That's a technology I say has been stagnant for 40 years in terms of efficiency. But this is the Mimi Moto stove. It uses wood pellets. So there's a potential to transfer energy sources, cutting trees, you can use crop residues and all those kinds of things. And of course, it has a control, you control heat, it requires a fan, it uses a solar heater, and you can also plug in and charge your phone. But these are some of the characteristics here. So it's rated as one of the most efficient cook stoves in thermal efficiency, in reducing carbon monoxide and other emissions. So this is what I'm talking about, and that's the kind of trajectory in transition in cooking energy that we are talking about. But when you talk about cooking energy, there's the energy ladder orthodoxy that's out there, that you increase incomes, that people will naturally just switch their energy use to cleaner cooking energy sources. For a lot of countries, biogas, LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, all electricity. Study upon study have shown that in African cities, that is not happening. Instead of a clean transition, there is a stacking of fuel. People use multiple stoves and multiple fuels at the same time in the same household. So instead of still thinking about this idea of energy transition by switching, then we really have to recognize what's happening with the energy mix and the energy stacking. So then it's important, then taking off from here, to start thinking about how can this mix of energy and stoves that are used in the household, how can they be made cleaner, right? So we are talking now about a cleaner stack of energy rather than a transition in energy. And then you are working within the mix to improve things as we move forward. So the study that I looked at is like a case study. So understanding that energy mix in in the city of Lilongwe, we're using this model, the Mimi Moto stove, but understanding the perceptions, acceptability of this stove. Would people actually use it? Do they like it? What are the benefits? What don't they like about it? And then moving on to look at the implications of it. Implications for energy policies, implication on climate. What does it mean when we are talking about energy transition in the context of climate change? So, and in this case, we were limited in the number of people that actually have the stove, which is what we targeted. So we were able to find only 216 households. This was about 70% of the new distribution of this stove, the population that was doing that. So mainly low-income communities in Lilongwe City, and we sampled randomly through that group to get to this 216. And we also did key informant interviews and focus groups, talking to users, policymakers, and all those kinds of people. And so this is how the population is characterized here. So mean age 32, and at the household, the target is a primary cook. We're not asking the men in the household, we're asking the cooks that actually use the stoves. And what happened, it was mostly then, although the households were mostly male-headed, the people that we spoke with were mostly women. So, and just to understand, only 36% of these households were connected to a water supply. In terms of education, only 66% had completed secondary education, and these are just other indicators that are not particularly important at the time, at the moment. So, moving forward, then. So I'll just quickly go through some of the results. So this gasifier stove, in terms of users and how it was used in the households, it confirmed the idea of the energy stack. The median for use of these stoves, the number of stoves that people had was 2. And you had most households had 2 stoves. And then you had the number of stoves ranged from 1 to 4 stoves that people used in their households. And so when you ask them what they use these stoves for, people say that they use the stove, they choose the use of the stove at any one time based on the available fuels. And others say that it depends on the type of food. They use different stoves to cook different foods. And others are about 45%. And others say they'll just use the same stove for whatever food they are cooking. And what we found was that the Mimi model stoves compared to those earlier stoves was the most versatile in terms of using it for different kinds of cooking. So, and in terms of food, the average number of meals they cook, 2.6 per day, but it ranged there are some households that were going hungry, they're going up to 9. But the important thing, about 50%, just over 50% would cook 3 meals per day. So the stove was very popular among users. 9 in 10 users, they gave this stove very high ratings in terms of how they're using it. And 91% of the users said that they would replace this stove if it broke. And then you have about nearly everyone, they said that they would recommend this stove to others for them to use. So there was no question about how good and about the usefulness of this stove. And in the end, and so when you looked at the household, you had about 3/4 were still used charcoal stoves, 97 used the Mimi model, and this is used at any time. And then you had only 4% had used the traditional 3-stone stove. So this is in the mix. But the important thing was that now 77% were using this stove as their primary cook stove in their households. Okay. And then you had 54% were using charcoal, which was the main cook stove, the primary fuel. They were using charcoal as a secondary fuel. So there's already a shift that's happening in household in the use of these energy sources. So before that, 84% would have used charcoal as a primary source of fuel. So you see that transition happening there. So in the before and after, electricity coming down a little bit, even people that use electricity are moving to this biomass stove, a small percentage. But what happened, it pretty much eliminated the use of firewood from about 4% to 0% as using firewood as the primary. LPGs is still at a very low stage. So again, just reiterating this chart, just showing the savings in energy type. The orange here is charcoal, the red is firewood. There were lower levels, and electricity, and so these are groups that never use electricity. So you see it's the importance of the orange, how over time you are decreasing the use of charcoal in each household. So that's the main thing that's happening in these households that use charcoal. Well, then we did lots of ratings on different kinds of scales and in terms of ease of use, how easy it is to start up the fire on the stove and to maintain the fire, to control the flame. and to regulate the flame while you are cooking. And so on all these things, very high ratings. So very easy, you can see those high numbers. So more than 90% rated this stove as very easy to use and highly favorable ratings. And in terms of design, there were also similarly very good ratings and popularity of how the stove was used. And the important things about using a stove, things like stove height matter, the physical fit within the cook space, the kitchen, things like durability, flame intensity, stove stability. In my country, we cook hard porridge is our main staple. And then in Ed's country, they call it sadza. In Southern Africa, we call it sima. It's a hard porridge. So you want your stove to be steady on the ground to be able to cook it. And you saw level the amount of smoke that's out there, and there's a very little smoke, 83%, and problems, respiratory problems from using the stove, phlegm and coughing and all those kinds of things, and eye watering. So when you're using the stove, especially the women, very high ratings on those on that side as well. And so, and then moving on in terms of switching to alternative fuels. This was also the quality of the fuel. People were fairly happy with that. And especially, I showed you the fuel as the wood pellets. So the wood pellets that were being used, they can be made from sawdust. They can be made from crop residues. There is a big movement in Malawi to move away from tobacco to growing groundnuts. You can use the groundnut husks to make these fuels. And there's a company that's put a big plan to do that. And so suddenly you can switch from using wood or cutting down trees to using residues or at least parts of trees and branches, so potentially reducing the amount of deforestation that's out there. So these are just, in terms of how much fuel it's used, it doesn't use a lot. So for a household of 4 or 5, you could just use a 1 kg and 2 bags of charcoal, 20 kg, and then they can last you up to 30 days. And that bag, the cost of that was pretty low. It was actually lower than charcoal, and in a lot of places it would be cheaper than firewood. But you ask, what would be the catch then? So we're gonna come back to that. But when you ask them, what is the most important thing that you like about this stuff? It wasn't the amount of energy you saved. It wasn't saving the environment. It wasn't health. It was time saving. The amount of time the cooks saved in cooking. There were women in the focus group discussion who say, instead of waking up at 5 o'clock to prepare my family to get ready for school, I can wake up later and I can cook breakfast and everything in half the time or less time. And this, as you're moving forward, this saves time for women to use in other productive activities. And you see that when you look at stove promotion programs around the world, this is hardly ever features in how as a feature to use to promote these stoves, right? They say, oh, you would save, oh yeah, you save money and all that. But so time saving, the most important benefit that people got, the cooks got from it. So, and then at the end of the day, the cook stove saved time, it saved fuel, it protected the environment. And so you have nearly everybody that rated this stove, you're saying it was very good and or it was good. So on the right, in terms of the ability to reduce cook time, these are the statistics over there. Its ability to reduce cooking time, very good to good. So reduce fuel use and reduce cook time. So those were the 2 main benefits, mostly in the good to the very good category. So some people say people use traditional stoves because or charcoal because it makes food taste better. And maybe that's why people will retain different stoves because they will use it for different things. Just like here, we still have, we still have the barbecue, the stove, and it's on charcoal. It's just that the fewer the uses are more than just the occasional barbecue. Right? So that's one of the things. And what we found is that 97% of them said that using this stove didn't really affect the taste of food. In terms of cultural ways of cooking, it didn't really affect how they organize. In fact, some people said that it was really good. It was like a modern looking stove. And then some of the people saw that as a sign of upward mobility in their communities. It can fit very well in spaces. Now, you don't have to go outside to a kitchen because of the smoke. You can actually, well, initially it will have some smoke for it to catch, but once it's burning, you saw that flame, you can even use, you can go inside to cook. So it kind of increased the flexibility with which you can use rather than limit what you can get in terms of agricultural acceptability from the stove. So, but there were some challenges. The biggest one, stove price. The initial stove price. And so for this stove, and this was distributed by a company starting in 2017, and then this survey we did in 2022. So over that time, the price of the stove came from about $125 to about $75. So then the next thing is, how can you get this stove into people's households to use with such an upfront cost? So another thing is some limited points to distribute the stove, also to get the fuel and the pellets, and already measures are being taken to increase these distribution points. But there were also a few technical issues where would I have the stove repaired if it breaks and all those kinds of things. The charging power of the stove, and it has a solar panel that powers the fan in it. Sometimes the battery is a little weak. And in terms of design, there was hardly any complaints about it. And so this is just shows the main in terms of what would you improve on the stove? What's the most important thing you would improve on the stove? And the biggest category is that they would improve nothing on it. But these are some of the factors that the people cited in terms of what they could change. And so again, so in terms of the cost then, perhaps I should have mentioned that the model that they use, the most popular model that they used to distribute this stove was in payroll deduction. So it was essentially a loan given to people. They could targeted workers, low-income workers, security guards, and people working manual labor and low-income people. And then they gave them a loan. It was either 12 months or 24 months, and they would pay a small monthly allowance, and that would be deducted from their salary every month. And so, in terms of people rating those kinds of distribution models, which are now particularly important, thinking that if you need to get these stoves into people's households, you need to deal with the price tag issue. So this monthly installments, you had about 83% had used it as a main method. But when you ask them if they prefer it, only 39% preferred that method. Yeah? And then some had paid it upfront. They just paid cash and got the stove, about 15%. And then only 22% thought that cash would be the best way they would prefer to pay for it. So, and then installment plan with the seller, 27%, and then a layaways and 10%, and then there were other modes. So essentially, some kind of installment is really the preferred one. Something that will reduce, spread, or minimize that upfront payment for the stove would help them. But even with that amount of money, when you compare cooking costs over time, you more than make up for the money because the fuel is cheaper as well, and then all those other benefits. So that was a different analysis that we looked at. But that's really the point where we are at. I have a slide at the end I can show later on in terms of other methods that I have looked at. So what are some of the implications then, as we are talking about cleaner energy, access to affordable and clean energy for everyone by 2030, Sustainable Development Goal 6, or as we are moving our economies to net zero on the climate change side. And remember that a lot of African countries, actually up to 60 to 80% of the carbon emissions are from cooking energy. right? There are lots of countries that contribute hardly anything, like especially the low-income countries. So globally, it might be as high as 10%. Some people put it as low as 2, 3. But when you look at this, some countries, then that number really it really goes up. And then as these countries are developing, and that's another major transition that's happening on the Africa, is the youth boards. And we can look at it from the positive side. By 2050, there will be 2.5 billion people in Africa. Every fourth person on the planet will be an African. So remember what the implications, so just think about what the implications of that was: growing energy needs, but also the opportunities that are there, growing middle class and driving a lot of economic change around the planet. And so we have to be placing ourselves ready for those kinds of changes as we are moving forward. So some of the study implications. So energy mixing, deal with it. Don't still assume. Talk about the energy ladder hypothesis. So it works, but only to a certain point. So people will stack. In a lot of African cities, they will energy stack. So what are you going to do within the stack? How can you approach the Sustainable Development Goal SDG 7? So these goals are unrealistic. So if you look at Malawi, for instance, how can you go from 97%, 98% dependent on biomass to a switch to electricity by 2030? And in fact, demand for charcoal is increasing rather than declining in a lot of in Malawian cities. So you can't even talk about that switch in the next 20, 30 years. So we have to start looking for intermediate solutions now. That will take us maybe halfway there. So this idea of the switch, we have to start thinking about what some people have called a cleaner energy stack. Within the mix, how can we start shifting the behavior of use of those stoves so that 77% use the MIMI model, the gasifier, as their primary stove, rather than 84% using charcoal? And then over time, you can find ways to increase the proportion that are using the cleaner stoves. So this is the idea of the cleaner stack. And the popularity and acceptability of this stove is not questionable at all. It's just getting it into people's households. And so this idea of the cleaner stack then is really important as we are moving forward. And then, did I think, so introducing, so we talked about the energy stack here, the popularity is there. So, and introducing this stove and the use of these pellets, it also starts shifting the energy uses to alternative energy sources. Now you're moving from people cutting down trees to make charcoal and firewood. Now you're using crop residues. Now, if you have a big sawmill, you can produce these pellets. There's already a company in northern Malawi that has a big pellet plant from sawdust. I talked about groundnuts. There's a plant there. There's a group producing these pellets from sawdust and crop residues, tobacco residues, and all those kinds of things. And so kind of promoting those, improving the supply of these and the quality of these pellets would be then important things that you need to do. And so and other implications for scaling up. So promoting these kinds of stoves. This is the gasifier. This is just one model of the gasifier. At the end of the day, there's companies that are looking for producing local models of the gasifier and reducing the price of the stove. So there's work that's being done to do that. I think for now, that stove is important. So there's a guy that's doing a stove from Zambia, and it's not out yet, but that's another thing. So promoting these ultra efficient stoves and pushing time saving might be the way you get it into kitchens, and learn to talk to women who actually use this stove, and they will appreciate those benefits. But the big thing is also having creative marketing arrangements for the stove that reduce the price of the stove. So some people have used pay as you cook techniques, but also a renter stove. So you can reduce the upfront payment of the stove to 5%. So this was already being tried in Malawi, but we have not had the time to study this and see how effective it is. But essentially, there's a company that gives the stove to you, trains you on how to use it. You just pay an upfront cost of $5. And then you use it, they repair it, they'll bring the fuel to you. The only thing that you have to promise to do is to buy a 30-kilogram bag of pellets from them every month, and they'll deliver it to you. If it breaks, they'll bring it to you. So, but even that's causing, there's some challenges associated with that as well. And another element I will talk about is that because these companies don't actually declare that the way they can do it is because they are claiming carbon credits for your stove, and they use the carbon benefits to subsidize the stove, but they keep quiet about that. So carbon credit ethics is another component that we really need to study as we are moving forward. So creative marketing, fewer supplying, making sure, and the quality of the supply as well. You can do subsidies. Governments have decided that this is an important thing. Look at the health benefits, look at the environmental benefits, and look at the household economic benefits. So why wouldn't government spend money on much less important stuff? Right? You could actually subsidize this stuff. So, and energy justice issues that I talked about, when you look at the climate policies and all that, there's a kind of a colonial aspect to it. If you start decolonizing some of these policies, then you can get the real cracks where you're not talking about energy transition by 2030 from 20%, from 90% biomass to like electricity, but you're being more realistic. What if we allow a middle ground where biomass fuels are part of the equation, but introduce these ultra-efficient stoves? So that you are moving closer, you're getting a cleaner stack. Even as everybody aspires, some people argue, why do you want, to make me think that I can't get electricity? Why should we not wish for electricity for everyone? We do, but are you going to get it by 2030? Right? We have to be realistic as well. So those are some of the points that I was talking about. So we'll stop here. The same conclusion, very popular stove, and it's ready to go. Price is a problem. Creative marketing techniques is to get their carbon finance. Be open. If you are doing this, and maybe you should tell the people that you're, and there are technologies now that they actually track each of the stoves and they see, but the opportunities for that, for future research then are that you can really understand the cooking behavior in the household. How many hours do they use this stove on? When did they start the stove? When was it in operation and all that? But what this data does is that it also improves the estimation of carbon emissions from a household. And it allows you then to start refining the carbon savings from the household from stacks rather than individual use of stoves. This is where the science should go in terms of assessing impacts. What do different mixes of stoves in the house, what benefits do they bring as you move forward? And so this is some of the interesting work moving forward. So I'll stop here now and I'll take questions, and some of the conclusions are pretty similar there.
Thank you very much, Professor Zulu. We have some time for questions and discussion. If you just raise your hand, as usual, introduce yourself and make your question as brief as possible. Questions? Yes, there's one here.
Hi, thank you for the talk. We've been working in Burundi and a few other countries with pyrolytic gasification stoves since 2018. So I have some experience in the area. And I would say in regards to the Mimimoto, the price is just simply unattainable for the vast majority of countries, and it will be for the future.
Yes.
So I think you addressed the issues properly. One, the stove is too expensive. Two, the pelletization value chain is problematic unless you have wood mills nearby, because the energy density changes dramatically as you move between different types of residue. So, Inyanyeri in Rwanda failed because of those obstacles, right? They had a great system analogous to what you described, but I just don't see the Mimimoto as a viable option at present, unless you're talking about upper level consumers who have the ability to pay, $90 to $100 for the stove. So I think we ought to focus on different stove models. therein you have the same problems, because in our stove, it's about $18 to $20, and it's still unaffordable for the vast majority of, people in Burundi, where per capita income is something like $200. So, I wouldn't be so hopeful about just a comment about the mini moto, because I don't see it as an option at present. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for that comment. And the price is really a problem, and the delivery issues are still a problem. But I think there's been a case that's been more successful in Zambia, where they've been trying this, and then this model, that the rental stove model. And I think part of this is segmenting the population. Where would you target it? This is not something that you can take into rural areas. That's why we were looking at urban areas, where energy supply problems are a challenge as well. So for some of the kind of in urban areas, the lower income people, then if your power is off anyway, so one of the entry points was you can start it as an alternative cook stove when your power is off. So I do agree with you. There's a segmentation. You really need to target it to particular populations that can do it. And over time, and I think over time, with maybe stoves that are being produced that are lowering the price, then you can start spreading that to rural areas. But I do recognize that that is a challenge. But in this model that they already started, it's already started in Malawi. It's kind of a community marketing model, where they train people, they bring women together on how to use it, and they're moving forward. It's seeing some promising success, as the more recent case in Zambia is also showing.
Over here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joy. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering if you knew anything about like looking into biochar as a fuel source for stoves like these, and if that could be like a potential way forward to like take away from still needing like forest to be cut for fuel.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a good question. For this study, I haven't looked exactly at biochar, but I think it requires more processing as well of the fuel rather than on the burning side. Because the pellet, it's also you still need heavy machinery, but it just uses pressure to pelletize the biomass and all that. So in terms of processing, it's less. You're using less energy, and then the biochar is more involved. But some of the gasifiers will also like produce some biochar as an intermediate stage that it can be used as well. But it's just the amount of processing is like the next level of processing, whereas the pelletizers are really just using immense pressure and heat to produce the pellets.
The question over here.
Yes, I'm Maya. So have you suggested some tips to the housewives how to cook easily and quickly? For example, soaking the beans and grains overnight or something like this, or just putting the lid on the pots. Very, very basic tips. Have you provided to them?
Yeah, thank you. So part of this was more on the distributor side of things. So the part of selling it is they teach you how to use it, how to control the solar panel of it, but then this new model that are doing the rented stove approach, their approach is really a community approach, where they bring together groups of women, and the other women demonstrate how to use it. And that's how so it takes longer, but once people get to learn about the stove, then it's more ingrained. And then people really learn about it, and they know how to use it better. So it's a yes and no, but the distributor that I'm kind of hopeful of this community approach to marketing, and hoping that will improve the amount of how people learning how to use it.
Another question back here.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm African, and I know the reality of getting access to energy for cooking in rural area, even in the urban one. So this is something we need to think about it very well and take the benefit of your proposal. So I'm wondering how many countries in Africa are already implementing this Mimi cook stove. How many have adopted it at the current time? And the second part of my question is, imagine all households in the urban area of Malawi are adopting the Mimi cook stove. How do you sustain the provision of the raw material to make it work? Thank you.
So thank you, very good questions. And I'll go back to the second question because that's a challenge that has been raised and it was found to be a challenge. In the case of you can't really take this to scale unless you are sure about the production capacity. And this is not something you can have. It's difficult to have local, small scale production of this. So you'd have to work with the private sector on this kind of work. In the case of Malawi, there are already at least four major producers that are just coming up or ramping up production. One using sawdust, another one use groundnut shells, and another one that provides for this and other crop residues. And so, yeah, so that's an important part of the component of this kind of work. And again, that's why starting in urban areas would make it a little easier. The value chain would be easier than spreading to rural areas to start with. So very few countries have done this. And I just know, looking in the literature about the use of this, it's fairly new in terms of large-scale distribution. There have been lots of pilots that have been tested, but there's case studies in Nyanyeri in Rwanda, there's Zambia. There have been some case studies that have been there, some use in Kenya, and there might have been picked up on a couple of other countries in Ghana. So it's still very new in terms of widespread use, but there's pilots that are out there and spreading.
One final question from our online audience.
Yeah, thank you. An online attendee asks, how does this model and the model for the stove and for the demand for the pellets affect local competition, and what are the dynamics between the players in those areas?
Okay. So for now, because of what's involved in these stoves, for now it's an imported stove, so it's really not engaging. One of the things we want to do is maybe involve local people in marketing the stove or distributing it. For now, that's a model that they haven't developed yet because it needs capital to produce the stove. I mean, to import the stoves, and the producing of the pellets it needs equipment. So in that sense, then the main competition that would come is maybe with producers of charcoal stoves, where if people are shifting more to the use of these stoves. But some of what's happening then, you can kind of switch the value chain so that like the company that's producing this, they have started distribution centers. So people that were selling firewood, the better off ones, they can start distributing some of the pellets, for instance. It also increases the distribution centers. But there's also a potential, as you are moving forward, something to consider as well. Crop residues are important for soil fertility, for soil health. So could these residues at some point then start competing with the crop residues that you need in your field? So you have to be careful about. But if you are growing groundnuts, for instance, you have to shell the things anyway, or you grow rice, right? And the husk, you mill the husk, there's a milling place, then there are places that are better placed to take those kinds of considerations, those trade-offs into account.